when I hear any politician say, I stand with Israel, in my mind, I'm thinking they're saying, I raped kids on Epstein's island.
Right.
I know not everybody is, but I know I'm not the only one thinking that. And that is going to be a
Okay.
big
Right.
problem for all
Yeah.
these
Right.
politicians is that when you say, I stand with Israel, when it's so contrary to
Yeah.
America's interest and your own political interests, that's
Right.
what I'm going to be registering that like, uh-oh, big possibility that this man might be a pedophile.
Yeah.
Who maybe not, or they're just completely compromised. But the fact that people are making that association, and I know I'm not the only one saying it,
Right.
thinking that, that's
Yeah.
a problem. I just don't understand how we can continue forward as a society when we have this situation. It's just mind blowing to me. It's
Uh-huh.
such a weird situation that we're in. It's
Right.
just
Yeah.
unprecedented. Everybody's aware of it. And everybody's just horrified, like, "Oh my God, this is true that this tiny country that's engaged in a genocide is
Mhm.
controls our government, and we are and has poisoned our country." Just the moral fall for the United States, just in our support of this, the complicity of this is just
Mhm.
it's ruined the United States. And I think that was one good thing that the interview that Tucker had with Tony Aguilar, which I think everybody should watch. I mean, this guy is 25 years in the service, Green Beret, Special Forces, Purple Heart, Awards for Valor in combat zones all over the Middle East and in Asia. And so he's coming at it from a person that is an American, soldier decorated. And he talks about like, you joined to protect the oppressed and defend the defenseless. That's what we were supposed to be. And I think a lot of people that may have joined the army initially have that idea. You don't want to join the army to be like, oh boy, I'm going to be a bad guy and kill people. Or maybe there are some
Mhm.
psychos and we need to weed those
Yeah.
people out. But for the most
Right.
part, I think a lot of people do join because they want to do good. They want to be a force for good. But when it becomes
Mhm.
so clear that we are part of a force for evil and a complicit, it's just like, it destroys everything. It destroys everything. Like, what are we fighting for? Why are we here? Like, if there is a war, why you just come to this realization that we're the bad guys? And I think that's happening through every level of society, including the armed
Mhm.
forces. And it's just, I just
Mhm.
don't know how it's going to tear everything apart. It is
Yeah.
tearing things apart, though.
Right. Well, it is. Um, yeah. It's it's going to be interesting. We are. I think it's fair to say that we're in uncharted waters, and it's true in the U.S. As everything, every country has its unique situation. Every region is unique, but there are, the conditions are broadly similar, throughout the Western world. And again, you just have this elite that is wedded to a certain vision. It's globalist and it's also Zionist. I think those are two different things, but it is both those things. And these people that have been brought up and now rule these countries, they have imbibed. They have become true believers in the process. It was a long process of education and promotion. You learn, this is to be part of the ruling elite. You adopt certain ideas. And over time, these are the people that rose to the top. These are the people that rule our countries. The Macrons, the Starmers, the Mertzes, and Donald Trump's kind of different, but Donald Trump too. And yet, they're a product of a time, of a set of circumstances that doesn't exist now. I think like the people that are rising up now, people that are students at Ivy League schools, probably look at the world very differently than those people did. And they don't have, at least when it comes to Israel and Zionism, I'm not quite sure about the globalism, but I think it's got to have an impact on that too. Yeah, there has been a real shift. Um, Now, how is this all going to play out? I really don't know. I mean, this is uh, you have you can think a lot of how empires fall and regimes, dynasties fall. You just have there is this ruling caste that loses contact with reality. I'm thinking again, like at the end of the Qing dynasty and in China, there's people there's they ruled so long that they had the sense that that China belonged to them, and that and they had a formula for ruling, and it had worked for hundreds of years. You can even see a millennia, if you go to previous dynasties. but the ground had shifted under their feet, and in the end, there was just a total collapse. That's maybe somewhat of a far-fetched analogy, but I think there is something there. That's what we're looking at. Now, how it's all gonna play out. At the end, it's like for a real revolution to occur, you have to have some organized revolutionary force, and we don't have that at this point. We have a lot of anger, we have a lot of bitterness. We have a lot of disbelief, on the side of the populations. Again, throughout the Western world. The approval ratings for all these leaders are just way, are way down, often even in single digits in some cases, but quite often below 20%. I think it's 19% for Macron, for example, and I think it's very similar for Starmer. Well, anyway, you can see this is, and then you look at the broader situation. It's not just that these leaders are popular, but in general, institutions have lost their legitimacy over time. This is something that didn't happen just overnight, but we see it like accelerating. So there is this vacuum, and so the question arises: what's going to fill the vacuum? Because you can have a majority of people easily, that strongly disapprove of the present situation, but if they're not organized, you have to, if they're not actually organized and they haven't, into a party or into a militia or whatever, you have to have something, some organized force to actually affect a revolutionary change, and that's not here yet. So again, I think back to the end of the Qing dynasty, there was this collapse. I mean, this establishment just collapsed because it had become so it divorced from reality that at some point it became incapable of ruling. But there wasn't really an adequate replacement, so you had this period of chaos. Maybe we'll see something similar here. I don't know.
Did the Qing dynasty go to war before it collapsed?
Well, there were wars, the humiliations. That it was the Japanese, in 1895, and of course the European powers just came in and carved up. There was the Opium Wars, in the earlier part of the 19th century.
Okay.
But yeah, these were all humiliations that demonstrated the weakness of the Qing dynasty.
Yeah, well, what I'm worried about right now is that as the pressure turns up on Israel, as this wave, I feel like every couple months, I mean, it's steady that the support for Israel goes down, but then we're having this increased acceleration because of the starvation, and more people are jumping on. And once you break through that veil, I think it's got to be such a relief for that person that has gone over on the side. It's like, because you're in the moral position now, and it just got to feel better. It can't feel good when you're defending this constantly, and then more and more people are out trying to say, like, what are you doing? Look at these pictures, look at this video. And eventually it's like, I feel like if you break through the other side, it's got to be such a relief, like, oh my God, I'm not defending evil anymore. So as this pressure begins to mount up, I think that Israel, the way what they do is, if everybody's yelling at them about Gaza and they're starting to see some real repercussions or potential threats to their aid, that they'll start a war with Iran, that they'll start it back up, that they're going to do whatever they can to get it going again, because we saw that happen when that 12-day war, is that they kind of upped things up in the West Bank and in Palestine, because all eyes were just watching everything between Iran and Israel. And so I think that's what, that's still the end goal. I mean, so do you think that the likelihood of the war striking up between Iran and Israel will increase as the pressure and the eyes on Gaza are becoming more and more focused?
Yeah, I think there's a real chance. It goes down to Netanyahu and his coalition, and the coalition is holding together for the time being, but it's constantly. I think there's, I believe the Knesset's in recess, and so there's a few weeks there that Netanyahu has, before he's going to be presented with these challenges, challenges from the ultra-Orthodox who want to have an exemption, a military, service exemption, which is very, very unpopular for obvious reasons with the general population. And then there, in general, there is dissatisfaction with the war in Gaza, not unfortunately because of the suffering of the Palestinians there, but because of the hostages. We're talking about 50 hostages dead and alive that a majority of Jewish Israelis just want to bring home, and they want actually Netanyahu to stop the war so they can be brought home. We're talking about 3/4 of the population is in favor of actually stopping the war, temporarily at least. Get them home, then you can start it again, and they don't care. The problem is he's got 3/4 of the population who want that, who want a ceasefire so that the hostages can be brought home. But then you have the extremists within his coalition that are saying, if you do if a ceasefire, if you agree to a ceasefire, we're out of here. And if they leave his coalition, then he won't be able to rule. There have to be elections, and there's a chance that he could lose power. So he's in a very, very, very precarious situation. So the incentives, as we talked about before, are always there, to launch a war. Now, I'm not saying that that's what caused him to launch that 12-day war against Iran, but it may, I certainly factored into it, or I strongly suspect that it factored into it. In fact, again, it's not just the question of his coalition, but of his own freedom, because there are these corruption charges that have been brought against him. And I believe actually he was supposed to be in court on the day that the war against Iran began. But because of that, he was able to cancel his appearance. So, you're just looking at this again, just the incentives of this one man and this coalition. It's the same dangerous mix that we talked about before. And it's already, I think it's fair to say, resulted in this 12-day war. And I'm sure he's looking for a way to do it again. I don't hear the steady drumbeat. Before it was always war against the Iran war, and I'm not hearing it now. But if we may start hearing it again soon. That there was this obvious pressure to push for war leading up to the war. We had seen it before; it had failed, under past administrations. This time, it succeeded. I haven't heard reports that he's doing that yet, but it may be that he just feels safe, while the Knesset is in recess. And then he may, also, he understands that they have to get, plug some of the holes in their defense, get more interceptors for air defense interceptors, for example. All these things are, I'm sure we're looking at. So we'll see, if we start hearing that drumbeat for war, then I think, I think we may see another one, and it may be driven by the personal considerations of Netanyahu again.